And you're live.
Yes, we are. Welcome back, everyone, to another video here. We've got a very special guest today. We've got Ben. Ben, do you want to say hello?
Hi.
Now, Ben's from Refold. I'm sure a lot of you would have heard about Refold and seen it pop up on YouTube and the videos they do, and just as a platform as a whole. So, do you want to first just introduce yourself, Ben, and just who you are and what you're doing at the moment?
Sure. My name's Ben, as you've already so kindly said, and I work for Refold, and I manage a lot of the marketing and content, plus a whole bunch of other stuff. I have been learning Spanish for, I think, over 3 years at this point. The math always confuses me. Doing like math back a couple years is weird, but I think it's about 3 years.
Yeah.
And currently I live a fair part of my life in Spanish, and but I'm actually currently focused on learning Czech. I have about 850 hours, give or take, in that language, and so that's been a big undertaking of mine. And yeah, on the Refold YouTube channel, I try to make helpful videos and tutorials about how to do specific things or talk about important topics for language learners to know. And I've done weekly videos for I think over a year at this point, and so there's a bunch of good stuff there. And our goal at Refold is to help as many people as possible reach high levels of fluency in really any language they want, not just Spanish, because we know that there's a lot of people that want to learn a language but are unsuccessful. And so we focus a lot on that success rate rather than what I call gimmicks of other language systems of being super easy or super fast or whatever. That's not really what our focus is. We really want everybody to achieve their goals, sort of regardless of what it is or their maybe potential problems in the past. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
Yeah, very nice. Well, yeah, I've loved all the content that Refold's produced on the YouTube channel. I've really been enjoying that. I feel like it aligns pretty well with how I've learnt Spanish so far. But before we get into, because I'll ask you a few questions about Refold a bit later on, but first, I'd like to hear just about your language learning journey. Let's start off with Spanish. So how did you start off with that? What was the motivation? Where did you start?
Well, so I mean, like a lot of people in the US, I'd had some Spanish in middle school, elementary school, like pretty young. And we started. So I went to a slightly different school than like the traditional public school. And so it was a little bit more focused on like engagement, and we sang songs and stuff, but it also didn't work. I didn't learn anything. I left, the 8th grade being able to count to 10, and I knew some random words, but like, that's about it. And then I went into, I didn't do Spanish for quite a long time. I actually studied German in high school and for many years after that. And then I went to, at some point I was like, okay, I like languages. I'm into this thing. I want to go back to Spanish because I should have a good a start there, right? Obviously. I tried it for a minute and I was like, oh, I know nothing. I completely forgot everything. And then I even tried to go to Spain for like a week, and very naively, I thought that I was going to be able to communicate just fine. I don't know why I thought that, honestly. I think it was sort of just a poor assumption, bit of cockiness. And it did not go well. It was like I have a distinct memory of just thinking that there were 3 genders in Spanish because there are in German.
Right.
I was like, oh, there's masculine, feminine, and neuter, right? And then the person I was talking to was like, what are you on about? What are you talking about? I have no idea. I was like, oh God, I don't know anything, do I? And then fast forward even some more years, and I was during the pandemic, and I found myself in northern Mexico as a because I was in New York before, and that kind of went, and it was like, okay, I probably shouldn't be in New York if rents are like 5 times the average and you can't go outside. So I found myself in northern Mexico with a bunch of free time, and I kind of came across Refold and was like, oh, this is a lot of the stuff that I've been thinking about and believe in, but more complete and better organized. And so I just followed that method, put a bunch of time into Spanish, and here I am 3 years later, more give or take.
Okay, cool. So did you, like, in terms of, you said you discovered Refold and the method they sort of put out there. So you were sort of already doing that sort of input type of method beforehand?
I was teaching English online, and I was telling my students to do a lot of the same things. I was specifically working with upper intermediates and advanced students on speaking and pronunciation and fluidity because of my background in phonology and that sort of thing. And I came across Refold and was like, oh yeah, this aligns with a lot of what I'd like teach and talk about. Then it kind of hit me, why am I not doing this for Spanish? I live in Mexico and want to improve my Spanish, but I'm still a beginner, or what we call a false beginner. And so it kind of hit me that I was like, oh, I should just do this.
Yeah, no, very nice. And what were the resources you used at that time when you sort of figured out like this is the way to do it? What were the resources?
I started with our ES1K, the vocab deck, just to make sure that I had the basic words. And it was very I was like, oh, I know 1,000 words, right? I knew about half of them. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's less than I thought. And then I started just going into TV shows, actually. I jumped right into TV shows for native speakers, and I used Migaku to go through each line, look up words, save words, and sort of went with that for a huge bulk of my time was all through TV shows. I had no idea that Dreaming Spanish existed. I didn't get into Spanish YouTube for probably like a whole year. I jammed a lot of TV shows. I think hundreds and hundreds of hours. I also re-listened to the entire Harry Potter series in Spanish because I listened to it on repeat as a kid, and I think literally I've heard it 15 times, and so it was very comprehensible at the beginning, even though it was like I put it on like 0.8 speed, but I could follow along with the story just based on character names and cognates. I did that, and then I started reading as well, and at this point I've read a lot of books in Spanish. I pretty much only read in Spanish. And so that combination of audiobooks, books, and TV shows is basically what I rode all the way to that functional fluency.
Yeah, sure. Very nice. So you kind of you dived right into the deep end in a sense, going straight to, and these were, I haven't heard of that TV show that you're talking of. These are native TV shows, in terms of they're not dubbed.
Yeah,
were they dubbed
I didn't.
TV? Yeah.
I think I started with Avatar: The Last Airbender and the Spanish dub, but I'd also seen that show a couple times, so it was pretty easy. But then it was right into direct to Netflix shows. I think I started with Club de Cuervos, which is a very advanced show, but I worked through that. Madre Solo hay dos, Quien mató a Sara. That was a good show. A little cheesy, but good. I actually have a whole list of all the shows that I watched. But I really enjoyed it. And since I was going slow in sentence mining and using lookups, it was really enjoyable as well.
Okay, so you were watching these shows and you were pausing and stopping it, going slower over some bits. Were you going back and forth? You weren't just sort of watching the show for what it is and then, doing some research on certain words after.
Yeah, it was, we make that distinction between free flow, where you're just letting something go and not really looking things up. If you miss something, it's gone and you just guess. Where that interactive is where you pause and you really try to get your fingers in there and go, okay, what's happening here? Why does this mean that? Or checking what it meant, right? So I would look up new words and I would re-listen to things. And I remember noticing things.
I presume you're doing less of that now?
Yeah, for Spanish, I don't do any of that. I look up words occasionally because now at this point I'm reading things like Dune or The Lord of the Rings, and so there's a bunch of old Spain words that it's like, okay, why would I know that? And it's like, and then I look it up. But for TV shows, movies, I just free flow. Never pause on YouTube videos or anything like that.
Yeah, no, I'm the same at the moment. I never really used that technique that you've mentioned in terms of sentence mining and stopping and pausing. I sort of had the path where I did the Dreaming Spanish beginner videos and worked my way up. So I guess it sort of depends who you are and what your interests are, but it's definitely a good option what you did if you're kind of someone who has more interest in those TV shows that are a bit more advanced, even though you might not be able to understand them. I think that could
Totally.
really be a good option, and it just depends who you are.
Yeah, it's very much like dependent on sort of your personality type, I'd say. Like my mom is doing a lot more dreaming Spanish and uh, trying to just to let things go, and then she's looking up and when she's reading, but I couldn't imagine her going through a TV show like that. But
Yeah.
it works really well for me, and I find that I guess engagement really helpful, especially
Hmm.
because it's I found it one of the best things about it for me is it's a focus tool. Like even when I was pretty advanced in Spanish, a couple years ago at this point, or I think maybe a year ago, I would write down words just in a notebook because it was helpful for me to focus on it. I didn't even look up those words. I would just like write down things that I heard to remind myself that I'm watching this video and focusing right now. And
Yeah.
found that to be a really helpful tool.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I presume it would be a good sort of sense, because I know with input as a whole, one thing I've struggled with is like you kind of forget you're making progress because it is so slow. But when you've got methods like that where you're writing down words and doing all those other sort of things, it can probably make you feel like you're making a bit more progress, which is good, I think.
Totally. There's a technique where you sort of do that. Just write down whatever you notice or hear or something as you're going on a note card and make a new note card every day. And then you just have a stack of note cards, which you don't even have to review or reference, but like you have a nice stack of something that you made, physically made
Yeah.
on your desk that you can be like, I did that, which is sort of cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's probably something I would recommend to friends if they were just to like start day one, get into comprehensible input learning with any language, because it's very daunting at the start when you're just watching these videos having no clue what's going on. You're like, how can I understand this
Yeah.
into the future?
There's a huge difference between somebody who like has learned a language and they understand the process and they're starting a new language versus somebody who is starting their first new language. It's a totally different ballgame.
Yeah, well, I think one of the big things is learning how to learn a new language, because it's I know you said you learnt German in school and a bit of Spanish as well, but I think we can both agree that traditional method's probably not the best way in terms of efficiency and getting you to fluency.
No, it's more to help you pass a test and to get a general understanding of like how the language functions, but not really the language itself.
Yeah.
I definitely am glad that I started with Spanish since it's got a lot of similarities to English and it's easier to get into because it allowed me to learn my process much better. And now that I'm learning Czech, my process is good to go. Like I can just focus on the language and not really worry about the language learning of it all. The tools are all set up. I know what I'm doing. I've done it before, and I can just focus on the language instead of other things that are maybe not as relevant.
Yeah, I guess it's sort of just like in terms of for you learning Czech now, it's just sort of like a matter of time, really. Like you know how to do it, you've done it before. You just
Exactly.
got to put in the hours. And how's it going with Czech? So you've been learning that for a couple of years now, or 1 year, 1.5 years,
A,
roughly.
a year and a couple of months.
Okay, right. Okay.
Yeah, because next March, January, February, March. Yeah, next March will be 2 years. So it's June. March is the third month. So yeah, like 15 months or so. It's something like that. And I have about 850 hours in total, and I'm feeling really good. I have a solid grasp of, I think, like 4,000 words. It's a little hard to count in Czech because not only do they have a ton of verb conjugations like Spanish, but also they do that with all the nouns. And so it's there's so many different like versions of each word. They have tons of prefixes. So it's hard to count the exact number of words that I know. But I'd say it's a solid grasp of like 4,000 words. I listen to these beginnerish podcasts about pretty normal topics that last about 10 minutes, and I know about 90% of the words in there. And so I feel very solid on there. I'm pretty good at listening. I've been watching TV shows, YouTube all the time, and it's really fun.
Yeah, very nice. I'm sure it's been a pretty enjoyable experience, as you said before, like just knowing how it all works now. You can sort of sit back and probably enjoy it a bit more, I presume, than sort of not knowing where you're going and if you're doing the right thing.
Exactly. It's it's nice to have already gone over that path because I can kind of tell where I am in it, rather than
Yeah.
being like, is this the end? Where am I going?
Yeah. Oh, it gets very daunting for sure, especially starting out, as you said,
Mhm.
with your first language. But how many hours per day of input are you getting, including everything at the moment? Did you stagger it where you started off a bit slower and then crept it up to become something a bit more manageable? What was the situation in terms of that?
Yeah, I started with about an hour per day, or actually an hour per day, but I've been very consistent with it with Czech. And then every 100 days or so, I would go up by about 30 minutes per day. So I started with 1 hour per day, hour and a half, two, 2.5. And now I've been doing 3 hours per day every morning for a couple of months and in Czech. And that's
Mm-hmm.
probably my upper limit. I don't think I can or really want to do more. But something that I'm very good at is consistency and doing that every single day. I've pretty much not missed a day since I started,
Mm-hmm.
and so that helps me to really build up that my hours just through that repetition going forward each day. And then in Spanish, I probably get it's very hard to count because my partner is a Spanish speaker. I live in Mexico, and I use it a good amount. But I do work in English, so I work most of my day in English. But then I interact throughout the day in Spanish. I read my book in Spanish. I listen to an audiobook in Spanish, and so I'd probably say between like an hour, 2 hours. But it's just so hard to count because it's so integrated to my life. It's like,
Yeah.
how many hours of English do you get? It's like, oh, it's
Yeah.
really hard to know. I'd say all the time that I speak, but not this. And like, it's so hard to know exactly.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's the goal with, like, that's sort of my goal with Spanish. It's like, I'm probably not there yet, but I'm sort of getting there where I just want it to just be another language in my life where I don't have to count these hours or anything like that. It's like, all right, do I want to watch an English TV show or a Spanish one? And it doesn't really matter. Just pick which one you enjoy
Totally.
more. Um, but in terms of so when you say 3 hours every morning you check at the moment, is that sort of a sit down, you're watching something on your computer or your TV, or is that more of like, you'll do an hour of that and then you might go do the dishes and put in some earphones, or is that fully sit down, you're fully engaged, that's what you're doing?
Yeah, I sit down for 3 hours and do my check every day. I start with reviewing some flashcards. That's less than 10 minutes at this point. I don't put too much focus on that. I do that beginner podcast that I said, which takes it's a 10-minute episode, so 10, 11 minutes. I then read 2 pages of a book in the Reader app that I like. Then I watch a bunch of YouTube without subtitles. Check YouTube doesn't have subtitles, so I watch it, but like an hour and a half of YouTube, and then I do intensive like sentence mining with my TV show for the rest of the time. And so that's about hour 15 of YouTube plus a little bit more reading and study. So that's
Okay.
my
And do you
that's
do
my
that
routine.
yeah, do you do that just in like one block, or do you break it up? 3 hours is a
I
long
do.
time, like
Yeah, I mean, I do like an hour block. Then I like usually make some breakfast, and I walk around a minute. Then I come back and I do about another hour block. So I usually do like 3 chunks and get up in between just to
yeah,
kind of disconnect for a second.
yeah, of course,
But
yeah.
I usually do it in pretty much one chunk before I start working. Occasionally, I'll like get up a little bit late or have an early meeting or something like that, and I'll have to do it later in the day. But I make sure that I always get it done before about 5 p.m.
Yeah, nice. Sounds like you've got a good plan, sort of moving forward with that, and I'm sure you'll be pretty successful. Now, moving on to just Refold, as a business and as a platform, do you just want to sort of give a quick rundown for what it is for anyone that might not be aware of what Refold is?
Yeah, so we think of ourselves as language learning guides, maybe coaches, rather than trying to reinvent some sort of process for learning or the best way to learn vocab or anything like that. We do have like our vocab decks, and we have a couple of Anki decks that we sell, but that's mostly because we saw pretty big hole in the market for good beginner vocab materials that just get out of your way and let you learn. But that's not really our core thing. What most people know us for is the roadmap or the Refold guide, which is a very detailed process of how to go through the language acquisition process, which was written by our CEO, Ethan, and Matt versus Japan. And he was basically the test case. And then Ethan was the person that came in and really pulled everything out of Matt's mind, put it into a roadmap, and then created this piece of content, essentially. But our goal is to help people learn a language in the way that works for them. Like, we understand that there is not one perfect method. We don't claim to have the exact 30 steps that you have to take to learn any language. We have recommendations that we make, but that's just on what works for a lot of people or most people. But one of the rules of Refold is, like, it's not a dogma. It's not something that you have to follow. It is meant to be a guide that you will deviate from. Everybody has to at some point, depending on the language they're learning, their interests, why they're learning it. There's just so many factors that are going to impact that. And so instead of trying to make some perfect path, we try to give you the tools to do it yourself, essentially.
Yeah, for sure. It sounds like it's a very interesting sort of business in a sense, because I don't really think there's anything else out there at the moment. Obviously, you've got other tools like, Dreaming Spanish, for instance, which produce comprehensible input content, and obviously that's quite different. But I think it's a really good idea to sort of, give people that guide. And I like what you said in terms of Refold's not giving out the perfect method on how to learn a language. It's quite flexible. And I remember when I first went on to Refold and sort of had a look at I don't know if it's still there, but on the homepage, it has a bunch of reviews from people and on how they used Refold to get better at learning their respected language. And a lot of them were saying that the same thing. It's sort of a way to make language learning manageable and fun and fresh.
Yeah, I think a good analogy is actually thinking about gyms and personal trainers and that sort of thing. A lot of companies might try to invent the best workout device or the perfect set of weights or something like that. That's maybe what Duolingo, Memrise, Migaku are trying to do, or something like that, where they're trying to make the best tools to use in some way. And these exist, right? There's companies that have made, they claim to be the perfect workout tool. Like, you just need this one machine and it'll be perfect for you and you'll be in the best shape of your life, or whatever it is. And then there's the personal trainers who they try to work directly with people and understand what their goals are, what their current health situation is, what they're like, do they have any injuries or other potential issues that they have to keep in mind, and they make personalized plans, that sort of thing. Then there's like the gyms. There's so many different levels to like that whole industry, and that's kind of sort of similar to how we see the language learning industry. And our goal is to understand that industry and really know what the entire language learning ecosystem and process is, to be able to best help individual people achieve their personal goals.
Okay, right. So do you get like individual people, like I know a bit about Refold, but I've never sort of, because a person can come to Refold and say, I need help learning a language. What's the process in that?
Yeah, so for a while we did personal, like, one-on-one stuff with like clients who came to us and said, I'm struggling, I need help. And we would sort of look at what their goals are, where they were in the process, and give specific recommendations. And we check in with them, and we see, okay, they're really struggling with consistency. They know what to do when they do it, but they're really struggling to do consistency. So we focus on that. Or sometimes we would sit with some people and go, okay, so what are you doing in this process? How are you thinking about the language? And we might realize, oh, they're thinking about the process wrong. They're not actually trying to understand. They're just expecting it to be understood by themselves, like, rather than actually working. So like, there's all these different things that we might do one-on-one. We're not currently focused on that right now since it's not super scalable. But we did build through all of that learning and working one-on-one with students, a course, what we call the Teach Yourself a Language course. And that is different than the Refold guide in the sense that it's trying to give you exactly what you should do each day. We understand that it's not going to work for a lot of people. A lot of people would rather guide themselves through it and figure out their own process, like you, like me, like a lot of us on the team. But working with people, we see the similar maybe potential issues they have or what questions they have, and we want to address those in a way that is more approachable. So I gave the example of my mom, who's been learning Spanish every day for a couple of years now, going much slower, much more casual, I'd say. But to get started, she really needs that kind of hand holding, I guess you could say it, because it's not the top of her priority list. She needs a little bit of guidance, and she has plenty of questions, but might not know how to format them, phrase them. And so it's like trying to cut those things off and give people the tools that they need to actually learn a language they want to learn, saying, here, try this, immerse with this, do this thing, that sort of thing. And so that's how we try to function, I guess, as a business, is that specific helping you one-on-one, even though, no, it's not going to be the right thing for many people.
Yeah, I think that's super, super valuable as well, especially when it's sort of like for people like you and me and anyone else that's already in this space and has had, some form of success with, using comprehensible input. It's sort of hard to, for me, I feel like I forget how hard it is to understand what to do at the start when you have no idea. All you know about languages, as I said before, learning them in schools with a textbook. It's really quite a daunting task. And if you don't know a lot about it, it's going to feel very strange, and it's probably going to sound like a bit of a scam in a sense, like forget everything you know about learning languages and, do it this way. So I think it's super valuable in terms of, as you said, like holding someone's hand a bit and helping them through, and hopefully they can sort of have good results.
Yeah, it's definitely super weird to be like, hey, just try to understand. And we're gonna next week actually, and now that I was recording, is going to come out. Can I speak English? Next week at time of recording, no, I can't speak English. We're working on a Refold in 10 minutes video, which is like a condensed Refold guide to show you what is this process that we're trying to say. And one of the big parts that we wanted to make sure was in there is understanding or comprehensible input is not like you understand everything all the time, which is a huge weird step for people to make, because for us as native English speakers, the expectation when we sit down to watch a movie in English is that we will understand everything, right? We will just get it all without even thinking. And that's the mindset that most people come into everything with. So when they sit down with something that's even a little bit hard, like it's in a new accent, right? If you've never heard of Scottish people before and you sit down to watch Braveheart or something, you're going to be like, what is going on? This is uncomfortable. This feels weird. And so trying to say okay, you're not going to understand things, and that's okay, but you are going to focus on the things that you do understand and enjoy that, and make guesses. And that's normal because you have to relearn how to understand language in order to have success. A lot of people just get so frustrated that they don't understand anything in their minds, and they give up. But then you ask them and you go, okay, what was it about? They go, oh, they were talking about this basketball. And you go, did you see a basketball? No, but I heard the word basketball. So no, oh, I did understand something. Okay. But I understood only 5%. That's terrible. It's no, that's great. You're understanding 5% of a language you don't speak. And so that difference of thinking is really hard to get for a lot of people. And so that's a kind of a focus at the beginning there to make it not terrible, basically.
Yeah, it's really hard at the start, like especially if you know nothing about comprehensible input. It's super daunting. You're like, there's no way this can work. There's no way, but it clearly does. And there's so many cases now for people that you can see online where they've just put in the hours and it's paid off.
Totally.
So yeah. just finishing off now, I like to ask people this. What's your one tip with someone who's day one, they're like, I'm going to sit down for 30 minutes to an hour a day and immerse in a language, and I'm going to try to learn it through this method that sort of Refold claims and suggests? What would be your tip?
For Spanish or for any language?
Let's go with Spanish.
Yeah, so honestly, the biggest tip that I have for Spanish learners is to get into TV shows. I'm, I think, an outlier in the fact that I use a lot of TV shows, but I definitely attribute them to sort of my success because of the fact that they are both natural but also planned and perfect, right? Because they're scripted and edited and stuff.
Yeah.
But especially kind of in the beginner, it gives you a great bridge between like the fast, really flowing Spanish that you might hear on the metro or whatever, versus like super slow, comprehensible input, capital C, capital I. And there's a lot of great TV in Spanish, which is why specifically for Spanish. Excuse me. And so getting into TV shows that have longer story arcs and being able to learn about characters and people and also learn the language, I think is an underutilized resource for a lot of Spanish learners, especially with the abundance of things on YouTube and mostly YouTube is, I think, the main tool right now. So I would definitely recommend TV shows because they're abundant, interesting, and really good learning tools.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I was probably a bit late to all the TV shows. Obviously my Spanish wouldn't be near as good as yours or anything like that, but I found them quite difficult, and now I can sort of kind of get into them and kind of watch those like Spanish sitcom style shows where it's a bit easier to understand, and definitely really enjoying that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think you can make great use of them really at any level. And so I don't really know your Spanish level, honestly, but my guess is that you'd find a lot of success with just putting on subtitles and going through and looking up a word here and there. Because one of the things that I like about shows is that there's a lot of visual context, because like you can see what the characters are doing, right? You can kind of guess. It's like, oh, that person's very upset, or oh, that person just punched that person, they're going to fight, or whatever it is, right? You can kind of figure out what's going on, even if it was on mute. And so that being able to get into even if it's like a couple season story, can give you so many hours of input that are really engaging, or potentially, and just packed full of language.
Yeah, I think it's a great tip, and I'll sort of try to continue to immerse myself in as many TV shows as possible. But thanks so much for coming on, Ben. I'm sure my viewers have really enjoyed it and definitely taken some few tips and tricks from yourself and your journey. Hey. So yeah, I really appreciate it.
Well, I was glad to be here. It was fun. I do enjoy talking about Spanish. Yep. And as a small little personal plug, but recently, I think just this week, as we're recording, I released a video on how I would relearn Spanish if I was smacked upside the head and forgot it all. So if you want to hear my thoughts a little bit more condensed, definitely check out that video.
Yeah, I'll be sure to check that one out. All right. Thank you, Ben.
All right. Thank you.